Have you ever noticed how some people feel guilty for relaxing, even when they've done nothing wrong? Or how some people panic when they make a small mistake, like it's the end of the world? Maybe you double-check everything. Maybe you overthink texts before sending them. Maybe you feel uncomfortable breaking rules, even small ones. And if any of this sounds familiar, there's a good chance you grew up with strict parents. But the interesting part is that strict parenting doesn't just create obedient kids. Psychologically, it often creates very specific kinds of adults, and most people don't even realize how much of their personality was shaped by those early rules, expectations, and pressure. Imagine a child sitting at a table doing homework while everyone else is outside playing, not because they want to, because they were told, work first, fun later. Now think of that child growing up. They're now 25, maybe 30, maybe older, and they still can't relax without feeling like they should be doing something productive. No one is forcing them anymore. The parents aren't even in the room, but the voice stayed. That's one of the most powerful psychological effects of strict parenting. Eventually, the parent's voice becomes your own inner voice. Psychologists sometimes talk about something called internalized authority. That's when external rules become internal rules. So instead of your parents saying, "Don't be lazy," your brain says it to you automatically. Instead of someone checking your work, you check it 5 times yourself. Strict parenting often creates very self-disciplined people, very responsible people, very reliable people, but it can also create people who are extremely hard on themselves, people who feel like they're never doing enough, even when they're doing more than everyone else. And here's something interesting. Many people who grew up with strict parents become very good at reading other people's moods. When you grow up in an environment where you don't want to disappoint your parents, your brain becomes very good at scanning for emotional signals. You learn to notice tone of voice, facial expressions, small changes in behavior. You become very observant, very careful. This is why many people with strict parents grow up to be very polite, very respectful, very aware of social rules. But sometimes this also turns into people-pleasing. They don't just avoid disappointing their parents anymore, they avoid disappointing everyone. There's also this strange relationship with rules. Some people who grew up with strict parents become extremely rule-following adults. They arrive early to everything. They follow instructions exactly. They hate breaking rules. But other people go the complete opposite direction. They become rule breakers. They love freedom, they hate being told what to do, and they avoid anything that feels controlling. Same childhood environment, completely different outcome. Psychologically, both are reactions to control. One adapts by becoming perfect within the system. The other adapts by rejecting the system entirely. Another thing that often happens is that people with strict parents become very independent emotionally. Not always confident, but independent. They learn early that they have to solve problems on their own, manage their time, control their behavior, handle pressure. So later in life, they often look very calm on the outside, very responsible, very put together, but inside, they might feel a lot of pressure all the time because they're used to high expectations, and they put those same expectations on themselves.
There's also something called conditional approval. This is when a child feels loved or praised mainly when they succeed, behave well, or achieve something. So the brain starts to connect love with performance. Achievement equals approval. Success equals worth. And this can follow someone for the rest of their life. They don't relax after success, they just move to the next goal. They don't feel proud for long, they just feel relieved, and then the cycle repeats. But here's the important part, and this is where the perspective changes a bit. Growing up with strict parents doesn't just create anxiety or pressure, it also often creates incredibly resilient people. People who can work hard even when they don't feel like it. People who can delay gratification. People who can handle responsibility earlier than others. People who are disciplined, reliable, and capable of pushing through difficult situations. Traits that are actually very powerful in the real world. The problem is not discipline. The problem is when discipline comes without self-compassion. When the inner voice only criticizes but never says you did well. When rest feels illegal. When mistakes feel dangerous instead of normal. That's usually the real psychological struggle for people who had strict parents. They don't struggle with working hard, they struggle with being kind to themselves. And if you really think about it, many people spend their adult life slowly learning something that other people learned as kids. They learn that making mistakes is normal. They learn that resting is not laziness. They learn that saying no is not disrespect. They learn that their worth is not only based on performance. It's almost like they spend their childhood learning discipline and their adulthood learning self-acceptance. So if you grew up with strict parents, you might be more disciplined than most people, more responsible than most people, more independent than most people. But you might also be harder on yourself than anyone else would ever be. And understanding that might be one of the most important things you can realize. Because once you see it, you start changing the way you talk to yourself, the way you treat yourself, and the way you define success. And I'm actually really curious about this, because people's experiences with strict parents are very different. Some people think it helped them a lot. Some people think it made things harder. So I'd love to know what your experience was, and whether you think strict parents made you stronger, more anxious, more disciplined, or maybe a bit of everything. So let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoy these type of psychology videos, which teach you a lot of stuff you don't know about your brain, think about subscribing, because we're going to keep learning more interesting psychology facts that will definitely help you understand yourself better.